Hey y'all, I'm Tommy. Thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Today what we're going to be doing is going over some of the details of a TJ-6 conversion. There's a couple ways of doing it. This is going to be the way that I'll show you the way that I'm going to do it with regards to the body, the frame, and the rear suspension. So in the process of doing this, I'm also going to kind of do a bit of a walk around of the Jeep. It'll be quick. Basically just give you an idea of what I'm working with. If you're running a stock frame, stock suspension under your TJ, it'll be easier, frankly. So I've not created more challenge. Well, not intentionally created more challenges. I mean, the Jeep works really well. The suspension that I built for it is fantastic. It's really, really good. The problem is that, well, you'll see. All right, let's go check it out. Okay, so to do a TJ-6 conversion, you're basically adding 15 inches to the body, you're adding 15 inches to the frame. So first we're gonna look at the body and what you need to do. You don't wanna just necessarily cut the body straight through the belt rail, through the side panels, through the tub, and all the way through. You wanna give this some thought because it can make your life a lot easier down the road. I've done a whole bunch of research, and thankfully there's a lot of guys who have documented this process pretty well. And so, you know, I'm kind of going off a lot of their experience because I haven't done this yet. So, but the first step, if you ask me anyway, is to remove the belt rails. Now these are the parts of the Jeep where the soft top clips underneath. And I think it's better to remove these. Now these are spot welded on and they have a little bit of seam sealer in here. Not much though. So once you get those spot welds drilled out, which I'll show you the tool that I used. Hopefully that focuses. If not, I'm not sure what to tell you. Anyway, so basically you go through and drill out, there's like, you know, a bunch of spot welds on here. And basically you just drill those out and eventually the belt rail will be able to lift up and then you want to get that out of the way. Eventually you will need to cut and add 15 inches to this somewhere. I'm going to leave the front part because it's shaped a little bit differently. I'm gonna leave this part intact. I'm gonna cut it probably somewhere over here. And then I'm gonna add, a friend of mine hooked me up with some belt rails off of his Jeep, and I'll be grafting in 15 inches with this piece right here. So I'll be doing that, welding this in, and then putting it back on the Jeep after I add the 15 inches. So that's how you're gonna wanna address the belt rail. The next step is gonna be cutting the tub. So when you do, in my opinion, I don't know if this is really all that necessary, but I'm kind of a stickler and I'm gonna probably take some precautions maybe a lot of people don't care to take. I wanna make sure the body doesn't warp or anything when I'm cutting it, and I want it, you know, so to help it get realigned better after the fact when I'm putting it all back together, I got some scrap steel here and back here even. I'll explain why I'm going to put one in the back. Again, that's part of my unique situation here. But, you know, this section right here, the front part where I'm going to cut, this is pretty stout right here. I'm not really too concerned about this flexing or bowing or anything. But this sheet metal here could maybe kind of move around a little bit. So I'm going to tack weld these pieces in here up front. Try to give this a little structural integrity so when it comes time to put it all back together, hopefully it won't be all that bad. So the next step is, where are you going to cut? So once you get some bracing in here, where do you cut the body and why? So let me move the camera around. I'll show you a little bit more close up how at least I'm going to be cutting the sides of the Jeep here. Okay, so now you've got your tub braced and ready to cut. So where are you going to cut it? And before I get into that, one real quick note about the belt rail here. Jeep does make, or at least they did make, an LJ belt rail. And some guys were lucky enough to find those at dealerships. They're not in production anymore, I believe. So to find one is going to be tough. Maybe you can get one off of a wrecked LJ, but that's not very easy. So more than likely, you're going to end up having to use your own and then just splicing in the 15 inches like I'm going to do. But you never know. You might get lucky if you want to look around a little bit. So then, so now you're ready to cut. So there's a couple things here to keep in mind. There's basically two sections that you need to consider here on the outside of the tub. And one is you got this nice big flat section here, which is gonna be relatively easy to work with. But then up here you have all these bends and contours. You have a bend here, and then up about a 60-degree angle or so, and then it flattens out, and then it folds over. So if you're good with sheet metal, you can replicate that. But there's other options out there. So you can buy a replacement quarter panel, not corner armor, but just a quarter panel from a number of suppliers. Like I picked up one from Quadratech. It's a little bit thinner gauge material. However, somebody's alarm's going off. However, the bends and radius and everything are all correct up here, so it'll line up nicely. So that's one option. The other option is to get sections off of a wrecked Jeep. I happen to have one, the back section of a tub in the backyard. More than likely, that's what I'll probably end up using, just because I think it's a little bit thicker gauge material and might be a little bit easier to work with. So, but basically, the cut that I'm going to do is basically I just did a vertical cut here and just used a hacksaw here and just cut to about this horizontal line right there, the little mark right there. From there, I'm actually not going straight down. I'm going at a slight angle. And what I'm doing is I'm following the contour here of the door. The reason I'm doing that is because on the back side here, which I'll show you in a bit, there's some structural sheet metal there. And it's where the cage and the seat belts and all attached to. So it's pretty stout. So if you cut right here, the thickness back here for this section is pretty wide. This kind of puts it in the middle. When you cut this, move this back and add graft in that 15 inches, that means that new panel will be touching and you can spot weld it or bond it or whatever to that inner structure. So I think that'll give it a lot more integrity. So I'm going to try to keep all this inside intact, and then the outside will just attach to that. So basically, as far as how far down this went, I just cut down here until I was on the flat vertical section of the side panel here. I went straight here because it'll just be easier to graft in a section of the kind of contoured section here. And then down here will just be a slight angle cut to graft in the plates. And so anyway, that's kind of relatively straightforward there. So that's about it on the outside. Down underneath, it'll get a little bit more complicated, but still nothing really dramatic down there or anything like that. Nothing really to be worried about. So the next thing is going to be to go inside the Jeep, and then it'll be a bunch of spot welds to be drilled out and some separating of panels. So let's move the camera around again and I'll show you what we got to do inside. Okay, so now we're going to focus on the inside of the Jeep. So one thing to keep in mind here is you can, to extend the inside of the Jeep, you can do it either up here on top of the kind of the cargo area where the rear seat sits, or you can stretch the floor. I've decided to stretch the floor. It'll give me a little bit more interior room, and I think it's just kind of wasted space to have all this, the elevated section where the back seat is, to have that, to just extend that, because it's providing more room under the Jeep, but that doesn't really do you much. In the front here, you can make some, panels here, store, whatever you want, toe straps, whatever. So, but and I really don't want to cut the fender wells, because that would just be, kind of a pain to try to splice in to extend that. So what you can see here is the pretty heavy wall structural part of the tub where the roll cage ties into, and your seat belts and all that kind of good stuff. So this is pretty strong right here. So what you're going to do is right along this flange here, you're going to drill out these spot welds, which you kind of feel it on there. If you take some of the material, take some of the paint off there, you can really see it. But anyway, you're going to drill out these spot welds, and then as you get down here, you're going to notice there's a lot of seam sealer. So there, I think there's some spot welds on the backside too. Yeah, sorry, there are some spot welds on the backside that'll have to get removed. And I'm gonna be kind of going into this, you know, with y'all, so to speak. So we'll see exactly what has to happen to get this separated in here. That's kind of the biggest unknown that I've got right now, is exactly what we're gonna see. But basically we wanna separate it here. And then once we get down here, I've removed all the seam sealer all the way across to the other side. So, and that can be kind of a pain in the butt. And you can use chisels or, you know, just anything you can find, really. I mean, I spent about an afternoon cutting away all that seam sealer. It's really hard. And then after I chipped it all away, I took a wire wheel brush and basically just removed all the rest of the paint, everything else, so I could see what I was working with and really clearly see where the spot welds are. So I'll try to get a little bit of close-up video on that to show you what you're looking at. But basically, there's spot welds on the back side right here, down at the bottom here. On the inside of the fender well, that's where there's a seam back here. So that'll be where some spot welds will need to be cut. But then, fortunately, when you move to farther inside the fender well, the spot welds are mostly visible from the inside of the Jeep. I think there's going to be some that are going to be accessible from the underside of the tub. So, but that'll be relatively straightforward from everything that I've seen. So I'm not really too worried about that part. But anyway, so that's kind of where you're going to separate the Jeep. So let me move the camera around a little bit. I'll show you, a little bit more where these spot welds are inside the Jeep. Okay, now we're looking inside the Jeep, so you can see where all this seam sealer was. Sorry, all along this corner here, all the way around this perimeter, all the way over to the other side. So here's some of the tools that I use, by the way. This is like, I guess they call them a multi-function tool, whatever. It just oscillates, and this was probably one of the best tools. And then I had just chisels. Did an okay job. And then after all that was done, just took a wire wheel and a drill, kind of cleaned everything up. So here you can kind of see, it cleaned up pretty well. So these spot welds right across the transmission tunnel, those are going to be on the underside. But then as you move farther along, hopefully you can see some of these spot welds, but there's spot welds along here that you can drill out from the top side. So, and then once you get around to the fender well, those are going to be on the outside, I believe, just right on the other side of this fender. So that gives you an idea. And then once you get all the way up over to the other side, there's some spot welds right along that surface there too. So, and then we'll see, I know there's gonna be some seam sealer all up in there, and then there's some, I believe some spot welds on the inside of the fender well right over there. So those will all have to be removed. Theoretically, once you do that, there's some structure underneath by the body mount. And so that'll have to get cut through. But once you do that, the body would be separated. And so you'll have a front and rear half of the tub, and you can take the next steps to then focus on the frame. So let's do that.